Welcome back to Founders Forum Global. This is the flagship event of Founders Forum. I'm Lizzie Burden. I'll be your host today. I'm UK correspondent on Bloomberg TV, and I'm pleased to say once again we have an amazing lineup of speakers for us. Our next panel is all about founders' stories, and we're going to be hearing from Alison Darcy, who is a psychologist turned founder and president of Woebot Health, which is a robot that makes people feel happier. I'm sure we could all do with a bit of that. We're also going to hear from Zhang, who is co-founder and CEO of Airwallex, whose vision is to become the global economic infrastructure to empower all modern businesses to grow beyond borders. And last but not least, we have Martin Varsavsky, who's founder and chairman of Inception, which is the biggest chain of fertility clinics in the US. He's also founder and CEO of Overture Life, a company devoted to the automation of the embryology lab. And your host for this panel is Rob Weeber. He is president of international wealth management at AlTi Global. We heard in our last session about the origins of artists and what they have in common. Now we'll hear the origins of founders and perhaps what you have in common. Before we start, as we are live on Bloomberg, I'd like to say to all of you panelists, this is your opportunity to give us your newest news, your sauciest secrets, and I'll hand over to you, Rob.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. Thank you all for being here. That was a lovely introduction. My name is Robert Weeber. I'm president of international wealth management at AlTi Global. I was also a founder myself at one point, so I understand the trials and tribulations and stresses and strains of starting a business. And I'm looking forward to delving into that with each of you momentarily. So there's no obvious common thread between the businesses we have on stage today, so fertility, mental health, and payments. But when you dig a level below that, you can see that each of these businesses have been founded with one purpose in mind, which is to improve the human experience. So I think that speaks to our founders here today, and I'm looking forward to finding out a little more about each of you. So I'll give a little bit more background on each of the founders here. So Alison is a medical doctor, a clinical psychologist, and who has worked in coding as well as various other elements before founding Woebot. She's also an adjunct professor at Stanford and works with a team of AI experts to build her business. Jack, thank you for joining us all the way from the US. Airwallex, he's probably too modest to say, but 100,000 businesses work with the company globally, 1,600 employees, you told me earlier. It's growing rapidly. 20 locations, and the last valuation round, to hide your blushes, was $5.5 billion, so congratulations on that. And Martin Varsavsky, thank you for joining us, of Prelude Fertility and Overture Life. These are just the latest two of your ventures that you've engaged with. Philanthropist, entrepreneur, multiple companies under his belt. I think that digging into exactly what drives you to keep doing it again and again will be very, very interesting. So to kick off, perhaps closest to me, I'll start with Martin. I'd love to dig a little bit into your entrepreneurial journey at the very start with your first company and what drives you to make that decision and continue doing it.
Well, I was a pre-med student at NYU. I thought I was going to become a doctor. And then my father died when I was 22, and my family was left destitute. And I didn't, so my mother was saying, well, you have to find a job, you have to find a job. And I would go to job interviews, and they would say to me, well, how do you see yourself in 5 years? And I would say, well, at least as your boss, right? and they wouldn't hire me. I don't know why, but they wouldn't hire me. And so I went straight to be founder CEO at 22, and I've only been founder CEO because I really couldn't get a job.
That's an interesting motivation. Alison.
Yeah, for me, I suppose a treatment designer is how I would sort of describe it now at Stanford School of Medicine, making this, cutting edge therapies and evaluating them in randomized trials and so on. But I was always when you're aware of the growing mental health crisis, I was just always plagued by this, idea that, or the knowledge that it doesn't really matter how beautiful these treatments are that we create if people can't access them. And so I've always believed in, having had a minute as a coder, like in my early 20s, I've always believed that technology would be the answer to, providing scale for some of these services that have been traditionally sort of tied up in that human-to-human architecture that has been around since Freud. But people didn't really have any knowledge of how could we incorporate technology? How could we, amplify the precious resource that we have in the human therapists? And so, whereas that sort of came a bit naturally to me. So I would say the thing that ultimately caused me to create a company is a sort of a growing feeling that something's not right, coupled with a sort of innate sort of creativity. And eventually, I think the best way to complain is to make something. So another sort of a lot of key figures along the way, and lots and lots of help, and really great collaborations, and here we are.
Fantastic. Jack, I know you dabbled with a number of companies before, including a coffee shop, before landing on Airwallex, so I'd love to hear your story.
I was born in China and moved to Australia as a teenager, and lost financial support from age of 16 from my parents. So basically I have to figure out a way to live on my own and pay my tuition throughout the college. Tried a number of businesses, probably a dozen businesses before I founded Airwallex, and every single one is profitable. So Airwallex is the only one that took like almost 10 years to be profitable. Was in real estate, design, architecture, coffee businesses, burger chain, trading businesses, so many random businesses, but always keep the full-time job in a bank and writing code to trade FX and equities, because I have passion for engineering and programming, and trading at that time had a lot of interesting technologies I wanted to build. I think after a decade, I finally able to find what I'm interested in. Not that I was born to interested in payment, but just that when I was running the coffee shop, we were importing beans from Brazil and from Indonesia, packages from China, and we were need to making payments using Western Union and traditional banks, and they were charging us 4.5% on FX, and the payment took a couple of days to arrive, and my co-founder wiring payments to Brazil, and then sometimes take months and then bounce back. And we look deep into how the SWIFT system or correspondent banking system works. It basically goes through many intermediary banks. If basically the smaller country you're making payments to, the more intermediary bank you're going through, the higher the cost, the slower the payment process. And we thought there must be a better way of doing it. So we decided to build a financial infrastructure around the world for money movement in parallel to SWIFT. Now we're in a much better place. Probably build up infrastructure across over 100 countries now, and over 85% of the payments is near real time compared to SWIFT, which take days. I think the fundamental motivation is, number one, that I had to survive when I was young, so I had to try a number of businesses, and it's sort of just becoming a habit of building things. I think number two is I have a passion for engineering. Always wanted to leverage in technology to scale. Throughout building these so many businesses, I haven't found anything that interesting without leveraging technology. So finally found something can scale, which is kind of motivated me to stay in this role for a long time.
Fascinating. And just picking up on one thing you said, from the outset, the ambition was to build a parallel financial payment system, an alternative to SWIFT. That's a huge ambition. Is that, you didn't think incrementally, I'm just going to think about the next step, how to solve a small issue? That was it from the outset with you and your founders?
Well, initially we try to look for alternative solution to the banks in Western Union. We couldn't find anything, and I saw Wise was doing similar stuff, like interesting things in the consumer space, doing peer-to-peer payment. And we thought maybe we can leverage the same idea to do B2B. And we raised a seed round, and we experimented with the idea, and we realized the volume just never gonna get to the volume we needed to do actually real to peer-to-peer. So we basically raised a seed round, and we found that the algorithm never gonna work. It's going to take us hundreds of years to get to the volume that we can do real-time payment around the world. And then, so we couldn't really, we don't really know what the solution is, but as we keep trying, and we thought, there's so many real-time payment systems around the world, we can just kind of connect to every single one of them. But then we need to apply a license in every single central bank around the world. So we went on a journey to be regulated, getting all the licenses around the world, connect to the central bank, connect to the local payment system one by one over those 100+ countries. We didn't think it's the problem going to be that difficult to solve to get started, but we just went on a journey. Now we regulated in more than 60 countries. If anything goes wrong, I basically had to go to jail. So there's a lot of responsibilities.
Thank you. Alison, taking it back to the personal journey slightly, digging into some of the emotional challenges, I alluded to it at the start of the conversation, but the stresses and strains that you made the jump from academia into entrepreneurship, the product that you're producing as well is in the same sort of area of dealing with these stresses and strains. How did that work for you personally? And I guess all of us have had at some point in our careers, some feeling of imposter syndrome and how you grow this business. Should I be doing this? How have you navigated that?
Yes, I think probably not very well, or I think one of the key things for me, certainly in the earliest days, because it's interesting, I'm not sure that academia is a great training for management, but this idea that especially under sort of a growth mindset really helps. So that you see challenge and mistakes and missteps and difficult times. That sort of is the path. It is that difficulty is where your strength comes from and where the growth comes from. And so it helps to really sort of just lean into that. And actually that became a core value in our company, just the idea of a growth mindset, particularly when you're trying to do something new. You need to sort of understand that there's going to be learning that happens, and it's going to be, it can be difficult, but that's the nature of it. And the second piece, I think, which has been a real blessing, of course, is just having a mission that really is much bigger than any individual or any individual company. And that absolutely keeps you very straight and narrow, very much driving, because you know that what you're driving towards is something that's really badly needed in the world, and very few people have the skill set to be able to, contribute meaningfully, and so that really helped in the early days.
Interesting. Just one thing you mentioned there, which perhaps Martin, you could talk to, is culture and building team culture within fast-growing companies. Perhaps you could give a little bit of a background on you're a serial entrepreneur. You've done it several times. The importance of culture and how you work to maintain culture in a fast-growing organization.
Well, in my case, I built 5 unicorns, let's say, over 30 years, and I've always relied to a great extent on, well, because these companies were in very different fields, like renewable energy, telecoms, consumer internet, and now fertility and healthcare. I always was new to the field, and I was somewhat ignorant. And when you start in a new field, you have to educate yourself, but it's also great to surround yourself with people from the field that know something about what you're going to build. And so I always try to find experts, let's say, or people from the field. But then it's interesting because there's a fine line between experience and prejudice, right? And people who have a lot of experience are sometimes also prejudiced. They see something and they say, oh, I've seen this before, it's this way, but then it turns out it wasn't the same thing, right? And that's where I come in. So I say, no, sorry, this is not experience, this is prejudice, this is a different situation, because I don't have the experience, right? So I only see prejudice. And so, so there's a balance between these people who are renewable energy people all their life, telecom people all their life, fertility doctors all their life, and me coming in and saying, okay, this field, for example, in the case of fertility, we now helped giving birth to 150,000 babies. We've done this at scale. We have 4,200 employees. We have 3 fertility companies. We haven't mentioned Gamito, which is a company that is launching a new medication to do IVF and egg freezing in 3 days instead of 14 days. So what happens there is I look at the pain points. I look, okay, women are going through this. It's 14 days of injections. What can we do for them? So this becomes easier. So once you're in the field, you just start seeing everything that's wrong, everything that should be fixed. And the people who are in the field many times don't see it. They say, look, IVF lasts 14 days. And we say, no, it shouldn't last 14 days, right? So it is this newcomer combined with the people in the field that has made me build the companies that I have built.
Thank you. Jack, you've over the past few years grown, as you mentioned, to 1,600 people. I mean, how do you, same question to you, how do you maintain the cohesive culture in 20 countries globally with the pace of growth that you've had?
We're still trying. The company is very multicultural. Started the business in Australia, and we still remain one of the largest office there. There's not much of a tech ecosystem in Melbourne. There's very few tech company there. I couldn't really get much mentorship, and my background is in FX trading and traditional businesses. So I made every single mistake you shouldn't make as a founder. And lucky that we survived through that. We basically started building the business by hiring bankers from Citibank or those large corporates that we believe in at a time that people need to understand the payment system or the SWIFT system or the banking system to do what we do. And that is the terrible mistake we have made because they just wanted to build another bad system. And we end up have to let go all these people we hire from those big banks, and now we basically changed from an experience-based recruitment system to a competency-based recruitment system, which if you're in Silicon Valley, I think you probably learn from day one. But unfortunately, it took us 5 years to understand that by making 100 mistakes in hiring. And essentially now we love to hire people who have never done that. Just like what Martin said, you probably don't need a deeper knowledge to innovate, to find a problem as long as you're in that field. We in the field, we see the pain point, we see the customer demand. You just need to build product based on first principle and obsessive on customer experience. As long as you find people with that hustle, with that mentality, you can build a very strong culture. And then in terms of globalization, it's even more difficult because we operate in so many countries and people work in silo, and sometimes the manager is in a different location than the employee. So we try the best we can. We had site lead and we had as many town halls as possible. We had local GM try to maintain the culture as much as possible. We implemented a kind of operating principle, then we keep amplifying the company through recruitment and through performance reviews. There's so many tactics. I wouldn't say any sort of magics that's in there, but just kind of keep trying, try to create as much consistency, putting as much effort as possible, and never try to give up to maintain that operating principles of your business.
That's incredibly interesting. Alison, when you started Woebot, similar question. You were galvanizing, you were making the transition from academia to entrepreneurship. How did you bring people along on that journey, galvanize people around what wasn't your idea, and transmit that energy and that passion and commitment to make them give up whatever they were doing to come and join you?
Yeah, I think part of it, of course, is as a founder, you are uniquely positioned to, communicate a very deep belief that something is very wrong, and we really have an opportunity here. And of course, venture capital helps with the opportunity. But I think other than that, I mean, it's about getting that early team right, because they're the ones that actually bring in the subsequent talent. And so, just as our co-panelists have been saying, it's so important that you get the sort of perspective and the values correct in those early employees. Yeah. Technical skill can be taught and acquired, but you can't really correct a values difference. That will always just kind of hang around and haunt you. And so, I think it was there was also a lot of mistakes. There were a lot of early mistakes, and they're very painful, and they're very painful lessons, but lessons nonetheless that you hopefully don't carry forward. And yeah, I think the culture piece has sort of developed naturally as we've grown, but it does help now. I do think that has, it's certainly we've become known as, it's really good to be a good place to work. Like that's a fantastic thing if your future employees, leave and then go on and set up their own companies and things like that. That's great, and so that's kind of what I strive for, and that ultimately I think translates to being able to hire good people.
Perfect. And getting a little bit more pithy on the on the business itself, probably a topic that's of interest to many people in the room today is raising funds, capital. Martin, you must have a formula for it now, given how many times you've done it. But I'd love to dig into the fundraising landscape and how you've approached that. You've all raised hundreds of millions of dollars for your respective companies. How do you approach that?
Well, one thing that I have avoided always is to use intermediaries, right? I'd rather go straight to the investors and look at them in the face and say, this is what we're doing, and I write directly to the funds and the people, and that helps a lot. We actually so for the larger company, Inception, Prelude, we raised money originally, but it's surprising. I mean, we've grown so much, and I had an absolute novel experience in my life last week, which is I got paid a dividend, which is something extraordinary, really, for a tech company to pay you a dividend. I was like, wow. And then a lot of people say paying dividends means you have a lack of imagination, but I had no lack of imagination getting that dividend and thinking all the things I'm going to do with it.
Yeah.
So
seven
it made me
children.
quite imaginative, yeah. And I have 7 children, yeah, so they can party with me too. But but we recently raised over $20 million for Overture Life, the company that automates the embryology lab with Khosla Ventures and Google Ventures. We recently raised $33 million for Gamito with RA Capital, Two Sigma, and Insight Ventures. And so I have a network of VCs that I call on for my ventures, and that tends to work well, but it's always hard, okay? Whoever says fundraising is easy, and even at this stage in my life with everything I have done, it's always those lengthy conversations, and what about this, and what about that, and you always find, you say, am I lying? Like you answer, you say, am I lying? Because they kind of put you in a corner where you're almost forced to lie, because they say, well, what if this happens to you? And what if this other thing happens to you? And of course the answer would be, well, then we're totally screwed. But you can't say that. You say, if I get hit by lightning, and if I get hit by that, and if I get hit by that, everything will be fine, right? So there is an element of exaggeration, I would say, in these conversations.
And the current environment?
Well, now, so until 21, we had this. November 21 was like the peak of the bubble. People were throwing money at you. I don't need money. I take some more. But now, after that, it became sort of like the desert. The startup surviving, crossing the desert when it's like, where's Moses? And then now, I would say the end of 23, 24 is beginning to look more normal again. Not a bubble, and not a desert.
Thank you. Alison, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. I think in the early days for me, that whole thing about, if you go and ask for advice, you might get capital. If you ask for capital, you get advice. That was true. I went asking for advice.
That's a good one.
And then I think, our earliest investors were just people that there was just very good chemistry with, and really understood deeply the problem, and that was wonderful. 2021 was when we raised a very large Series B. I've always believed in raising when you don't really need to, right? Just to have some money in the balance sheet. And I think I brought in a CEO in 2020. And the two of us are just a really great team. So I come in, sort of wheels me out. I do the passion and explain why, this is such an enormous problem, and the approach, and, why we're amazing. And Michael explains the business. And that's worked, it's worked very well.
Fantastic. Jack, a slightly different take on the same question is, you touched on it earlier, that the capital raising, being born out of Australia, not known for entrepreneurship or tech companies, I should say, not entrepreneurship. How did you navigate that with such an ambitious vision, and where did you go looking for money?
I literally just had one friend that we had a conversation in my coffee shop. And I said, I have this idea, I want to build it. I'm going to try to borrow some money from friends and families. And he said, why don't you raise venture capital? I literally asked him, like, what is venture capital? This is 2015. And I sent an email, cold called all the VCs in Australia, didn't get much of a luck. And then we basically start approaching VCs in Asia and the US and everywhere, essentially, try to raise our seed round. I think me and my co-founder's background is decent, so we able to raise a seed round. And the Series A is also difficult because Sequoia and Tencent and MasterCard led our Series A. And MasterCard was quite a big corporate at the time, and raising money from big corporate taking, as a Series A company, pre-revenue, took a long time. And also, like, I think Tencent was about to make the investment, and then Sequoia really sort of thinking Tencent gonna be our customer, we're gonna power the payment system around the world. So they're really looking at, what Tencent gonna do. They passed the investment committee, then I think the founder asked the question, why can't we build this ourselves?
Yeah.
And no one know how to answer the question. No one can tell the founder of a couple $100 billion company we can't build ourselves. So I remember that, it took a long time for me. I think probably 3 or 4 months time for me to waiting for a meeting spot with the founder.
Yeah.
And then the president, and I had like 30 minutes to convince him why he should invest instead of building himself. Lucky that we succeeded in that meeting. In 2021, we also raised several rounds, and at that time I feel like there's sort of this competitiveness in raising money. I raised 100 million, my competitor raised 200. I'm like, geez, I need to raise another 200, and then the valuation just keep going up. Just feels like if you are 2 months late, you are losing the game. So we kind of probably over-raised in 2021, which quite lucky that we only spent half the capital we raised, so we still have $500 million in the balance sheet. And most of the money I raised in 2021 that give us a runway to turn profitability last year. I think the lesson learned that is when you're able to raise the money, because you just never know when the market gonna change. And the venture capital markets always sort of swing from, I guess, one side to another very quickly, and this is a lesson learned. And I could have raised even more money in 21, but we thought the company gonna worth more than $10 billion in 22 if the market keep going, because the company's revenue keep doubling. And now, we grow our revenue 5x from 2021. The valuation is still the same.
Yeah.
So hopefully things gonna get better in the next 6 to 12 months as rates going down. But I think there's a lot of luck in the process. I mean, for founders that building that in a growth phase, I think you just try to capture the market momentum and try to raise as much as you can when they can. I think we kind of in a lucky position, not knowing what's going to happen in the next 2 years in 2021, I guess.
And how does that shift? Maybe Martin, how do you manage that balance between growth and profitability in a company, and how does that shift as the company develops?
Well, I think it really depends on what your company is aiming at doing. So let's say we have fertility services, fertility medication, fertility equipment. And I think in each company, the strategy is different. A lot of it has to do also with the expectations of your investors. And if your investors are thinking of you as a company that's more like a cash cow company, let's say that the fertility services are profitable, or if they're VCs who are really focused 100% on growth, right? Yeah. They want you to grow. They're the type of investors. And just like everything in life, you have to have the right employee for the right job, but you also have to have the right investor for the right strategy, right? And so that I think what I've seen in all my different companies, when things have gone wrong, there was a mismatch between the investor's expectation and the strategy of the company.
Yeah.
And I think everybody should research. Where I study the investors and say, what are these investors like? What do they want out of companies? And then try to find the ones that match your strategy.
Understood. And thinking it through, you mentioned, you touched on it earlier and when we were speaking earlier, I've noticed that when you've started companies, you've moved yourself as well quite often. How do you manage, is there such a thing as, do you have to put your life on pause? How do you mentioned you have 7 children. Do you bring them all with you as you start again?
I bring some of them with me. Let's say I have 4 still at home. Yeah, it's complicated because Europe, USA has been the constant of my life. I mean, I was born in Argentina and I lived there as a child, but my adult life has been Europe, USA, and it's always been a struggle between lifestyle, which I think it's much better, sorry to say, in Europe, but business and entrepreneurship, which I'm sorry to say is better in the States. And so I've been struggling with this. When I wanted to build a fertility companies, I said I have to move back to the States, which I did. We did as a family. If we get personal here, this led to some tension with my wife, my lovely Nina wife. And in the end, we negotiated something, which is that I cannot be more than 7 nights away from home. But those 7 nights I can be businesses wherever I want. And so with Zoom and my arrangement with my wife, which in the end I owe it to her because it's been wonderful to see the kids the rest of the time. And I'm grateful for that. But we actually have a formal agreement about this, and I count the nights. Like other people count the nights to avoid taxes, I count the nights to avoid punishment at home. And it's worked out well, and I'm structured. Every 5 weeks I spend a week in the US. I actually build US businesses out of Europe, but then when I go out for dinner, I'm in Europe, which is not bad.
Yeah, very good. Alison, a similar experience?
Yes, a lot of negotiation. Yeah, I travel, a lot of travel, and, you know, very supportive partner who's also very hardworking. But yeah, I think we have it down. The travel schedule is down like clockwork now, to minimize impact on the kids. Yeah. And yeah, and I try, when I'm traveling in the US, I try to have a really good night's sleep there. I hate to say that, please don't. I'm not in trouble, but it's true. When you have small kids.
I have a 3-year-old and an 8-month-old, so that's why I'm here.
Yeah,
Jack, from your perspective.
Well, I definitely traveled too much, so I never stayed in the city longer than 2 weeks for the last couple of years. When I started the business, because we need to build infrastructure in every single country, it doesn't matter where it is. My record is traveling to 14 countries in 21 days. And wow. I remember because I'm always on the call as well when I'm actually in and out of the airport. And when I actually land, I think it was in Vietnam at the time, I got out of the airport, I try to remember where I am. Yeah. It took me like literally 10 minutes to figure out where I am. So I think now I'm actually in a phase of the life that I'm still young, I think, approaching 40, but I try to find somewhere settling down, either in New York or London. But yeah, the non-dom thing in London doesn't quite help. But
I've heard. We're just running down on time slightly, so I just wanted to have a couple of quick questions for each of you, which are slightly different. So for Alison and Jack, the question would be, would you repeat the process? Knowing what you know now, would you do it again? And I'll ask Martin a slightly different take on that, just because I know you would. Alison. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I would do it faster, slightly differently, but absolutely I would do it every time.
I think it's quite a tough journey for me, right? Working 100 hours a week for 20 years, and there's a lot of personal sacrifice and family and stuff. So I'm not sure if I know, the cost will be this high, would I do it again? But if you ask me now, like, would I want to do something different after Airwallex? Of course, I would definitely want to create something, because I kind of know how to build company now, and the efficiency and the leverage I have is much higher than the normal startup founder. But yeah, I think figuring out the balance and the work is difficult. And then when you try to survive as a startup, which most of the startups need to do, and it's, you have to run 120 miles an hour, and then generally you don't have any balance. So it's a tough one. I think it really depends on each of the individual, and I personally would definitely say I enjoy the journey, and I hopefully have the opportunity to do something new in the next 20, 30 years.
All of the, just to follow up, all of the ventures you did before your business, your current business, you stopped doing them because you realized you didn't love them and that they weren't making the impact you wanted. I read that was something.
Yeah, nothing that is leveraging technology, nothing creating a positive impact to the world. I'm building buildings, right? Okay, I'm a real estate developer, I'm an architecture firm, but if that company doesn't exist tomorrow, who's gonna feel bad about it?
Yeah.
Nobody. Right, I want to build something that truly sort of empower entrepreneurs to grow that business globally, and that if Airwallex doesn't exist tomorrow, there's going to be a lot of business around the world that feel something significant is missing.
Yeah.
So that I feel what we're doing is meaningful, and that's what motivates me to continue to do, and then to sacrifice a lot of the personal stuff to create a meaningful outcome for the entrepreneurs, right? So I think that is probably the motivation for me to do something again. Yeah. Definitely not, the financial side of stuff anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a great segue into the question, Martin, that I was going to pose you, which is how do you've started, grown, and then left several companies. Jack's experience, he's at the helm of something which affects hundreds of thousands, millions of people. How do you effectively build a company that is a living organism, that is thriving, that you can, and I don't think this is spoken about enough, that you successfully extract yourself from and allow it to continue growing?
Yeah, some people have said, oh, you made such a mistake, you sold your companies, and look at how more valuable they are now, which is true. I mean, I sold Justel when it was worth like $1 billion, and I was worth like $5 billion. I sold Veolia when it was worth also around $1 billion, and I was worth $2.5 billion. It looks like I'm some kind of loser there, leaving money on the table and going and do something else. And these companies do better, and I don't have any shares anymore. And when I read about them, I'm still happy. It's kind of like, you were raising your kids, and then they go on their own and they do wonderful things. And I don't feel I left money on the table or whatever. I feel I raised them, I gave them to other people. These people grew them, good for them. Yeah. And I'm always proud. Like, I started this thing, it's doing well. I think the opposite can be very bad when you sell and then the company implodes and then nobody gets any value. And I think that would make me feel bad. But regarding the question of why I'm not like, let's say, Michael Dell or some friends or people I know that just built one company and they have their identity, but I never called the company the Varsavsky company, and I never felt they were me. Yeah. And I never put my identity in the company. And plus, I love early stage. I'm like perennial early stage. That's what really motivates me. Even if you look at my last 10 years, I started the clinics, and then I was CEO, but then I was chairman, and then I said, I want to start again with a medication, with embryology, automated embryology lab, because I just love startups.
I think that's a great segue to open up for questions from the audience. Are there any questions that anyone would like to pose to the panel today? There's a mic somewhere around. Oh, yeah.
I see one question in the back there.
Yep.
Maybe I'll
just shout.
Is it very different to start the first and the second and the third company, or does it feel the same?
The question was, does it feel different to start a second and third company versus setting out with your first?
Well, the question, what I can say is this, as a father of 7 children, is it different to have the first one, the second, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, the sixth one, the seventh one? It is different, But every time they're born, I think this is the only miracle we get to see in real life. And I would say the same thing about the companies. Yeah, they're all different, but once they work out, I never lose this sense of wonder, because it's so difficult to be an entrepreneur. And by the way, some companies I have started have failed too. And so I failed with the first cloud computing company in Europe. I lost like 80 million of my own money. Then I built another company recently that I lost 20 million, or recently in the last years I was doing autonomous robots. So it's not all success. And yes, so when things work out, you're like, this is a miracle. When you run a company, all you see is things going wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I can ask a question, when you decide to put all eggs in one basket, what are your criteria for deciding this is the thing I want to do? Because you must see a lot of ideas.
I see many ideas because finance have such a big market cap. A lot of people ask me, why don't you go to consumer? Why don't you go to lending? I think that's just a distraction to what the purpose is. I think the order of priority is very important for entrepreneur. You just keep the most important thing most important. I don't think there's like a set of criteria. I would just say it's more of founder's intuition than anything else. That's what make what you feel that the most important thing for your customer, for the company at that stage. And there's so much variables in your decision-making process. But at the end of the day, I'll just trust my intuition.
Thank you. I'm afraid we're going to unfortunately have to cut it off here. If any other questions, they are here and vulnerable and accessible, and feel free to approach them directly. And that just leaves me to thank our panel. Thank you very much for being so open and direct with us, the audience, and also those on the live stream. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for your honesty. What a great panel. I took so much from that. We're going to hear from Dr. Deepak Chopra later. I was waiting for his wisdom, but we've already had so much. Some of the best ideas come out of the need to survive. If you're having a wobble, focus on the mission. And if you want money, ask for advice. We're going to take a quick break now. We're going to be back at 11:25. We're going to have a live episode of The Rest is Entertainment. So come back and join us then. Thank you.